The courtroom had never been this quiet before. Not during high-profile drug cases, not even when a mayor once sat in the defendant's chair. Today was different. Today, the silence wasn't tense. It was sacred, reverent, because the little girl walking in wasn't just another witness. She was the witness. Emily Clare, 10 years old, tiny, pale, dressed in a plain lavender dress that looked like it had been picked by someone else. Her hair was parted perfectly in the middle and braided down one side, not a strand out of place. Her face was still, her eyes unreadable. And clutched in her right hand, attached by a sturdy leather leash, was Max, a tall, alert German shepherd with amber eyes and a quiet intensity that made even the seasoned bailiff straighten up. They entered together, step for step, past the rows of spectators, reporters, and curious town residents who had packed every inch of the gallery. Even the air felt like it was waiting. Emily didn't look at the crowd. She didn't seem to notice the cameras perched behind the glass window to her left. She didn't flinch at the click of pens or the sound of seats creaking under shifting bodies. Her only movements were focused, one foot in front of the other, and her hand occasionally brushing Max's shoulder for reassurance. The judge, a sharp-minded and deeply respected man named Harold Whitmore, had seen hundreds of cases. He'd watched killers fake tears, victims faint on the stand, and jurors break down in deliberation. But nothing had prepared him for the gravity that walked into his courtroom that day. Emily was escorted to the front row by her mother, who had already testified earlier that morning. Her father stayed in the hallway, pacing. They didn't know what Emily would do, if she would speak, if she would freeze, or if she would even make it inside. The decision to let her attend had been made only hours before. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat and peered over his glasses. "Is the minor witness ready?" he asked, more gently than usual. Emily didn't respond. She just sat down slowly, Max curling into position beside her feet like a trained soldier. His gaze swept the room, assessing threats no one else could see. His job wasn't just emotional support. He was her communicator, her guardian, her voice when hers had gone silent. The defendant shifted in his seat. Gerald Manners, the former school bus driver, who'd once been a trusted figure in the community, now sat in a cheap suit 2 sizes too big, trying to look harmless. The contrast between him and the child he was accused of harming was almost laughably stark. But no one was laughing. Everyone knew Emily hadn't spoken since the day of the alleged incident. Not one word in public, not to police, not even to her therapist. Only to Max. And that's what made this day so important. The prosecutor stood, but didn't speak. He waited. Everyone did. Until Emily reached down, squeezed Max's ear twice, something her therapists had trained her to do as a grounding technique, and then looked forward, straight at the judge. "She's ready," the prosecutor finally said, watching her carefully. "Judge." Whitmore gave the faintest nod. "Then we proceed with care." The moment was electric. Emily didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone carried the weight of truth, of pain, and maybe of justice. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but she was the one everyone would remember. And Max, ever alert, ever faithful, waited for her first signal. The courthouse in Millstone had never seen a trial like this. It wasn't just the nature of the accusations, it was who the accused was. Gerald Manners had been a fixture in the community for over a decade. He drove the school bus on Route 7, covering the same neighborhoods, waving to the same parents, greeting the same children. Every morning. To most, he was just another harmless face behind the wheel. That was before the first whisper came. A mother saying her son was terrified to get on the bus. A girl waking up from nightmares. And then, one day, Emily stopped speaking entirely. Silence was the alarm the town couldn't ignore. The investigation revealed inconsistencies in Manor's schedule, gaps in camera footage, complaints buried in administrative files. Slowly, a picture began to form, one more sinister than anyone wanted to believe. But even with multiple children reporting odd behavior, none had details that stuck. Fear twisted their words. Shame muted their memories. Except for one. Emily. Emily had been on Manor's bus the day the incident allegedly occurred. She had been assigned to sit near the front, in clear view. But something had gone wrong. The problem was, Emily wouldn't speak. Not to her parents, not to investigators, not to trained child trauma counselors. She only communicated with Max. At first, that seemed like a dead end. Until one therapist, Dr. Rachel Dunn, proposed a method inspired by trauma therapy used in war zones using service animals trained to interpret commands via subtle physical cues. Emily and Max trained for months. Max was not just comfort. He became her translator. The day before the trial, Emily's parents were asked a heart-wrenching question. Would they let her appear in court, even if she couldn't speak? They hesitated. But when Emily saw the courtroom on the news that night, she looked at Max and gave a shorthand signal, yes. So here they were. Reporters from state media stations hovered near the courthouse, held back only by yellow barricades and the heavy presence of deputies. Protesters with signs, "Protect our children," "Justice for Emily," lined the sidewalk. But inside the courtroom, all noise faded into breathless anticipation. Gerald Manners sat with his lawyer, a slick professional named Joel Kessler, who specialized in breaking down testimonies, especially those of traumatized kids. He looked confident until Emily walked in with Max. Kessler leaned over and whispered something to Manners, but the man didn't react. His hands fidgeted in his lap. Sweat pooled at his collar. The jury was made up of a diverse mix: mothers, grandfathers, teachers, and one young woman studying child psychology. They all watched Emily, not blinking. She looked so small, yet so composed. There was a quiet strength in her presence, even in her silence. The prosecutor, Daniel Carrington, had handled serious cases before, but nothing like this. "We don't need traditional testimony," he had told the judge in pretrial arguments. "We have a girl who has endured something unspeakable, and she's found a way to speak with Max." Judge Whitmore had initially hesitated. The law had no precedent for a child testifying through a dog. But after reading the psychological evaluations, viewing training videos, and hearing from Dr. Dunn, he allowed it on the condition that it be handled with caution and decorum. And so, Emily sat in the front row, Max at her feet, the air charged with unspoken tension. Carrington rose and approached gently. "Emily," he said softly, "I'll ask you only a few questions. You don't need to speak. Just let Max do what he's trained to do." Emily blinked once. Her hand slid down to Max's shoulder. The courtroom leaned in as one. Kessler scoffed under his breath. "This is a circus," he muttered. But the judge didn't move to stop it. This was no circus. This was a child's last stand. And everyone in that courtroom sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. Long before the courtroom moment, Max had been more than just a dog. He was a lifeline. After Emily stopped speaking, her parents were desperate. She no longer played, no longer made eye contact. Her eyes were hollow, and even music, her favorite thing in the world, didn't bring her back. She spent her days curled up in corners, trembling when anyone knocked at the door. The Emily they knew had vanished. Therapists and doctors tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, even EMDR, but she stayed locked away inside herself. It was Dr. Rachel Dunn who introduced the idea of pairing her with a trauma-trained service dog. Emily's parents were skeptical at first. How could a dog help their daughter express the pain she couldn't even speak of? But the day Max walked into the therapy room, everything changed. He didn't rush Emily. He didn't bark or nuzzle, or force affection. He simply walked to her, sat down, and waited. Emily didn't move for 5 minutes. Then, slowly, her fingers reached out and brushed his fur. For the first time in weeks, she didn't cry when someone entered her space. Max became her safe zone. As Max was introduced to Emily's world, his training intensified. He learned to respond to customized hand signal subtle movements designed by Dr. Dunn that corresponded to yes, no, stop, I'm scared, and more. It wasn't just about obedience, it was interpretation. Communication. Max wasn't guessing. He was listening with his eyes. Over months, the signals evolved into an unspoken language. Emily never needed to say a word. Her hands, her posture, even the way she breathed, Max read it all. If she was afraid, he would position himself in front of her. If she was ready, he would sit calmly and wait for the cue. Their bond wasn't ordinary. It was surgical. By the time the trial date arrived, Emily had made remarkable progress. She still hadn't spoken aloud, but she could tell entire stories using Max. Her therapist documented dozens of sessions where Emily used hand signals to describe what happened on the bus, details consistent with other reports, but never publicly disclosed. It was chilling and real. When Judge Whitmore reviewed the evidence, he was struck by a video submitted as part of Emily's psychological file. In the video, Dr. Dunn gently asked Emily, "Do you remember who hurt you?" Emily made a hand motion. Max barked. Once. Was it someone you knew? Another hand motion. Another bark. Each response came with complete consistency across sessions. Max never barked at random. He didn't whine or growl or move unless she told him to. This wasn't anecdotal. It was clinical. In court, Carrington planned to use Max as the medium through which Emily would testify. He knew it would draw criticism, possibly even ridicule. But he also knew the power of truth when it comes in forms people don't expect. Today, Max wasn't just a dog. He was her translator, her witness stand. Her voice. As Emily sat beside him, fingers resting lightly on his shoulder. He was already working, eyes scanning her body language, breath syncing with hers. She hadn't moved yet. But he was ready. The judge leaned slightly forward. "Emily, with Max's help, will begin." The first question was rehearsed, not for the courtroom, but for Emily's comfort. Simple, controlled. "Emily, do you recognize the man sitting there?" Her hand twitched slightly. Max's ears rose. No one in the courtroom dared breathe. Gave a small signal, barely noticeable unless you were looking. Max responded, not with a bark, yet but with a forward lean and alert gaze. He was waiting for confirmation. Her fingers tapped twice, and that's when Max barked once, loud and clear. The bark echoed against the wood-paneled walls like a gunshot of truth. The judge blinked. The jury froze. Gerald Manners swallowed hard. "Emily?" She lowered her hand and sat still, her message delivered. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It was a theater of human emotion. And everyone inside it had just witnessed something they couldn't explain, but knew was real. Emily had not spoken. She had not pointed. She had only given Max a small signal. And he had barked once. One bark that changed the entire temperature. In the room. Gerald Manners shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His lawyer, Joel Kessler, immediately stood up, his voice loud and full of outrage. "Objection, Your Honor. This isn't testimony. It's theatrics. You can't convict a man based on a dog's bark." But Judge Whitmore didn't answer right away. He was looking at Emily. The little girl remained perfectly still, her hand resting gently on Max's back. Her eyes didn't flicker. She was calm, grounded. Max's tail lay flat, his ears forward, every part of him alert. The judge had been skeptical earlier, He wasn't a man easily swayed by sentiment, but this wasn't emotion. It was clarity, precision. He turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Carrington, explain again briefly how the dog's behavior has been verified. Carrington nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Max is a certified trauma response service animal. He's been trained through a rigorous program to recognize specific hand signals given by Emily signals that were designed by her licensed trauma therapist, Dr. Rachel Dunn. The dog does not guess. He does not act randomly. Every movement he makes is in response to Emily's confirmed gestures, all medically documented. Kessler scoffed. So we're taking a child's silent gestures and treating them like sworn testimony? This is unprecedented and unprovable. Dr. Dunn stood. At that moment, Your Honor, may I be heard? Judge Whitmore allowed it. Briefly, she approached the bench. Emily's signals are not whimsical. They've been tested over 6 months in controlled sessions. Her gestures have been recorded, and Max's responses have been consistent. In over 93% of verified exercises. This is her only language right now. If we silence it, we're silencing the victim entirely. The judge stared at the expert for a long moment. Then he turned back to the courtroom and cleared his throat. Objection noted. Overruled. The court will allow this form of communication to proceed. However, the prosecution must ensure each signal and response is clearly explained on the record. We move forward with caution. There was a murmur across the room. Some nodded in support. Others shook their heads, stunned. But no one left. No one could take their eyes off Emily. Kessler sat down hard, a flush creeping up his neck. Manners leaned toward him, whispering something, but Kessler didn't respond. Back at the front, Carrington took a slow breath, then carefully moved a few steps forward. Emily, he said softly, keeping his voice even and reassuring, I want you to think about what happened on that day. I'm going to ask you a few simple questions. You only need to respond through Max, like you've done before. Max turned slightly, sensing her emotional shift. His eyes scanned her hands. Did something happen on the bus that made you afraid? Carrington asked. Emily's fingers moved. Max barked once. The sound rang out again, sharp and undeniable. Somewhere in the back row, a woman gasped audibly. Carrington gave it a second before continuing. Was it the man sitting at that table who hurt you? Emily didn't hesitate this time. Her fingers flicked with a motion so subtle. Only Max saw a dot, and then Max barked dash again, not louder, not more forcefully. The bark hit like thunder in a room that had become a storm of silence. The judge leaned back. The jury collectively exhaled. Carrington stepped back, giving Emily space. Max sat quietly again, watching over her. His job was only beginning. Emily, still wordless, had just become the most powerful voice in the room. Max's bark echoed through the courtroom like the crack of a gavel, sharper and more defining than any word spoken that day. It wasn't just a sound, it was a verdict in itself. The room froze, held in place by something deeper than shock. Reverence. A child who hadn't spoken in nearly a year had just named her abuser with the only voice she trusted, her dog. Gerald Manners stared straight ahead, but something in his posture changed. The bravado, the false calm, it all seemed to leak out of him, like air from a balloon pricked by a needle. He slumped slightly in his chair, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. Joel Kessler, his attorney, leaned over with a forced smirk, whispering quickly, It's just a bark. Don't look shaken. They can't convict on a bark. But the jury wasn't buying it. They weren't looking at Manners anymore. All 12 jurors were focused solely on Emily. She hadn't moved since Max barked. Her hand still rested lightly on his shoulder, and her eyes stared ahead with a blank, unreadable expression. But her stillness was powerful, anchored. She wasn't hiding behind Max. She was channeling herself through him. Carrington let the moment hang in the air. He didn't want to rush it. Timing was everything now. The jury had to feel the truth, not just hear it. "Emily," he said gently, "do you remember where you were sitting on the bus that day?" Her fingers moved again, a slight rotation of her wrist. Max let out one soft bark. Carrington nodded. "Were you alone in that seat?" Emily's hand dropped lower, brushing Max's side. He made a short, low noise, not quite a bark, more of a grunt. That had been practiced too. Dr. Dunn leaned forward slightly from her seat behind the prosecution bench. She had trained Max to differentiate between gestures that indicated emotional states versus direct answers. This one meant discomfort, anxiety. Was there someone sitting next to you that you didn't want to be there? Carrington asked. Small twitch of Emily's hand. One firm bark. The jury was starting to breathe heavier now. One of them, an older woman in her 60s, wiped her eyes quietly with a tissue. Another juror, a father of 3, sat forward, elbows on knees, hands clenched. Across the aisle, the courtroom gallery had gone completely still. Even the reporters didn't dare type. Every word, every breath felt sacred. Judge Whitmore watched. All of it from the bench, his fingers steepled under his chin. This wasn't just unprecedented, it was transformative. He had spent decades listening to evidence. But never like this. Joel Kessler stood again, desperate to take control. "Objection, Your Honor. This process is purely emotional. It's not admissible testimony under traditional standards. That dog cannot confirm anything." Carrington turned toward him, calm but sharp. "Your Honor, the dog is not testifying. The child is. The dog is only translating communication that has been documented and medically validated. We are not asking the jury to believe in the dog. We're asking them to believe in the girl." The judge said nothing for a moment, then overruled. "Continue." Kessler sat down, this time slower. His confidence was draining. Emily remained still, as if unaware of the chaos her silent gestures had created. But Max felt it all. He glanced up at her face, watching for her next signal. He didn't fidget. He didn't break focus. He was the guardian of a truth no one else could reach. And then, without being prompted, Emily gave a short, almost imperceptible signal. Max turned and barked. No question had been asked. No words exchanged, but somehow, that bark said everything. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted as the defense scrambled to regain control. Joel Kessler's voice rose sharply, attempting to dismantle the weight Max's barks had carried. "This is fantasy masquerading as fact. A dog barking on command cannot replace sworn testimony. We demand this method be struck from the record." His words echoed through the courtroom, but the jury's eyes didn't waver. They had witnessed something undeniable. Emily's silence was powerful. Max's responses were not mere tricks. They were her voice. Dr. Rachel Dunn was called back to the stand, and this time, her presence was more commanding. "Members of the court," she began firmly, "Emily suffers from selective mutism caused by extreme trauma. Traditional verbal testimony is impossible for her right now. However, this method communication through Max is based on scientifically validated protocols used worldwide." She pulled out detailed reports, photographs from training sessions, and video evidence. On the screen, Emily's hand gestures and Max's corresponding barks played repeatedly. The consistency undeniable. The signals are discrete hand motions, known only to Emily and Max, Dr. Dunn explained. Max's responses are measured, specific, and uncontaminated by external stimuli. Kessler countered, "But how can you guarantee Max isn't just reacting to visual cues, unintentional or otherwise? This isn't a court of magic." The judge nodded thoughtfully, but Dr. Dunn was ready. In addition to the therapeutic sessions, Max underwent rigorous testing with multiple handlers. None could elicit responses. Only Emily's specific signals produced these precise barks. A murmur passed through the courtroom. The defense's attempts to dismiss the testimony as circus and magic seemed increasingly desperate. Carrington stood again, pointing gently to Emily and Max. The child has suffered unimaginable harm. This is her only way to testify. To deny her, that is to deny her justice. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. The court recognizes the unusual nature of this testimony. But based on the medical and psychological evidence presented, it is admissible. We proceed. Kessler slumped in his chair, frustration etched across his face. He whispered urgently to Manners, who sat rigid, eyes fixed on the floor. The jury absorbed every word with quiet attention. They weren't just judging facts, they were judging courage, survival, and the power of truth against silence. In the gallery, some spectators wiped tears from their eyes. Others whispered prayers. Emily remained composed, but visibly drained. She shifted her hand again on Max's shoulder, drawing strength from the dog, who was more than a companion. He was her advocate. Carrington approached cautiously. Emily, is it true the man at the table hurt other children on the bus? Emily's hand twitched. Max barked twice. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some people covered their mouths. Others exchanged shocked glances. Kessler stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is hearsay and speculation. But the judge raised his hand, sustained. The jury will disregard that statement for now. Next question, please. Despite the objection, the damage was done. The jury had heard what they needed. The message was clear. There were others, victims. Silenced by fear, just like Emily. As the trial progressed, Kessler's attempts to dismantle the testimony fell flat. The more he fought, the more the courtroom rallied behind Emily's silent bravery and Max's unwavering loyalty. Emily, silent but determined, continued to communicate through Max, each bark a thread, unraveling the web of lies spun by the defendant. Courtroom was no longer about legal procedures. It had become a stage for truth to rise quietly, powerfully, and undeniably. The courtroom was thick with anticipation. The air seemed charged, as if every person inside knew they were witnessing history unfold in real time. The prosecution took a breath and moved carefully now. Every question was measured, every response gauged for its emotional weight and clarity. This was no longer a simple trial. It was a delicate dance between silence and revelation. Emily, Daniel Carrington said softly, you've told us about what happened to you. Were there other children involved? Emily's fingers trembled. She glanced down at Max's fur, brushing it with a shaking hand. Her breath hitched slightly. The courtroom held its collective breath. Max's ears perked, his eyes fixed on Emily's face. Emily gave a small hand motion, one practiced and deliberate. Max barked twice. 2 barks. The sound reverberated off the wooden walls and struck the courtroom like a bolt of lightning. A gasp rose from the crowd. Tears welled in the eyes of many. In the back row, a mother clasped her hands tightly, her lips moving silently in prayer. Gerald Manners' face paled, his lips parted, but no words came. He looked cornered, exposed. For the first time in the trial, the facade cracked. Judge Whitmore raised a hand to calm the room. Order, please, he said, his voice steady but somber. We will proceed with decorum. The defense attorney, Joel Kessler, jumped to his feet. Your Honor, the suggestion that there are more victims is pure speculation based on a dog's bark. This is an outrage. But the jury had already seen beyond words. They had seen Emily's eyes haunted, but determined. They had seen Max respond, faithfully translating the girl's courage. Kessler continued, there is no hard evidence. No direct testimony from others. This is hearsay, and it should be dismissed. Carrington raised a hand calmly. Your Honor, we have testimony from other parents and counselors who have reported suspicious behavior from Manners with other children. What Emily has communicated today aligns with those reports. The judge nodded slowly. Noted, the jury will consider all evidence presented. As the trial moved forward, more layers of truth unraveled. The prosecution called additional witnesses' parents who noticed strange behaviors, a school counselor who recalled anonymous complaints, a child psychologist who testified about the patterns of trauma Emily's case exhibited. Each piece added weight to Emily's silent testimony. The defendants' defenses grew thinner, more frantic. The jury watched intently, their expressions a mixture of sympathy, resolve, and sometimes sorrow. Emily sat quietly, Max resting his head on her lap. She was exhausted, her hands trembling from the weight of the day. But every signal she gave was a small victory against fear. Later, as the court recessed briefly, the judge called Emily and her parents aside. His voice was kind but serious. You're incredibly brave, he said. No child should have to endure what you have, and yet you've stood here and shown remarkable strength. Emily looked up briefly and gave a faint nod. Max wagged his tail softly. The judge glanced around at the courtroom. This case isn't just about law. It's about justice in its purest form. And that justice will be served. Outside, news crews buzzed, ready to capture the closing chapters of a story that had captivated the entire town. Inside, a little girl and her dog had become the voice for many who had none. The truth had been spoken through silence, through signals, through the unwavering loyalty of a dog who understood more than words ever could. The jury filed back into the courtroom after only a few hours of deliberation. The weight of the evidence, the silent testimony, and the overwhelming courage of a little girl and her dog had left little room for doubt. Judge Whitmore looked over the jurors as they took their seats, his eyes steady but weary. Have you reached a verdict? The foreperson nodded, voice steady but somber. We have, Your Honor. The courtroom was silent, every breath held in anxious anticipation. The foreperson cleared their throat. We, the jury, find the defendant, Gerald Manners, guilty on all counts. The words hit the room like a tidal wave. Gasps, whispers, and some tears broke the silence. For Emily's parents, the verdict was a release, a long-awaited moment of justice after months of anguish. Max, sensing the shift, moved closer to Emily, laying his head gently on her lap. For the first time in the courtroom, Emily's lips parted. A soft, trembling voice escaped, "Good boy." The judge blinked, removing his glasses in disbelief. He wasn't expecting that the first words from Emily all day, maybe in months. This courtroom erupted not with chaos, but with applause. Some jurors wiped tears. Spectators nodded respectfully. Even the bailiffs exchanged glances that spoke volumes about what had just happened. Carrington smiled quietly, pride and relief mixing in his expression. Your Honor, he said softly, this verdict isn't just about punishment. It's about the voice given to a child silenced by fear. Kessler sat down quietly, the fight drained from him. Manners avoided all eyes, his face pale. Emily sat back, exhausted but peaceful. Max licked her hand, a silent comfort. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. This court recognizes the extraordinary nature of this case. Today, justice has been served, not only by the law, but by the courage of a child and her faithful companion. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had gathered, hearing the news through social media and news channels. They cheered, many holding signs proclaiming support for Emily and all victims of abuse. For Emily's parents, the long nightmare was finally over. Later that evening, as the courtroom emptied and the sun set, Emily sat quietly with her parents. And Max, in a small waiting room, her mother leaned in, eyes filled with tears. "Emily, I'm so proud of you." Emily smiled faintly and stroked Max's fur. "He helped me speak." Her father nodded, voice catching. "You're braver than anyone I know." Max rested his head on Emily's knee, eyes soft and warm. In that quiet room, surrounded by love and healing, Emily whispered again, "Good boy." Her voice was soft, fragile, but real, a promise of hope and healing. And as the courthouse lights dimmed, a small girl and her dog reminded everyone that sometimes the strongest voices come from the quietest places.